working at 5 there now. I woke up
In your dreams, you were fully active.
and I felt pretty much.
You've been in there, folks, since Sloan's. Good morning.
On Broadway in Soho?
Have you been in the building?
Yeah, the 7th one on 7th floor.
Yeah.
What's over there?
Oh, well, I guess...
When I go to New York, we stay at the Chelsea Inn, so listen, I'm used to slum.
Oh, okay, well, that explains it. So you're telling me your taste is so low that anything looks okay?
No, I'm saying the income is modest, and besides all the kids at the store when we go to New York want to stay where Sid and Nancy go.
Oh, yeah? Do they got to take the complimentary safety pin put in the mouth?
Oh, they probably would have been part of the report. Yeah, they don't like that at the Chelsea, though, when you say that. Oh, the pictures right there. Can we stay in Sid and Nancy's room? Yeah.
Where's our coffee? They don't have the coffee.
Right now, that thing when we put the Chelsea's name in the room, that's what Sid and Nancy's at, and that's all fame.
Humiliations. Well, at least the sexual part. The rest of it may be okay. We don't know. Good morning, everybody. How are you today? Great. Who did not come to the party last night? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Oh, these are the people who are awake. The rest of them have a good reason. If they don't snore, leave them alone. I think everybody stayed to what? 2?
1:30.
Okay. 2? What do we shut down? 2:30? Yeah.
We could have gone over at 12 because we were out of town. But we thought you'd all be in bed by
You have
then.
any good instructor?
Oh, no. Some people tried to be in bed by then, but the women said no. So anyway. Oh, hey, lighten up. It is not pretty.
That's what you said last night.
Of course.
Yeah.
Too many fat people got to lighten up. Oh, I'm sorry. Both humor and weight watching in one fell swoop. Okay. Good morning, everybody. We're going to do, in the morning, we're going to do the Freedom Store. We're going to do political cross-dressing and undressing. But first, we're going to do what's called nude bibliotherapy. And everybody takes off their clothes and reads book reports on romance novels. It's very exciting. Now that it's videoed, we have a forward by Rob Lowe that will be played. So who says that you can't have all kinds of fun with the Freedom Party? This is also part of our program to keep members active under threats of copies being sent to their neighbors. So we want you to know that.
Didn't you stipulate that this conference was the most fun we could have with our clothes on?
Yes, but I didn't say they were going to stay on.
Oh.
There was, see, one assumed, notice this, she said the most fun you can have with your clothes on, and she just assumed we had to keep them on. Now, isn't this a sort of narrow interpretation? All right. Good morning, everybody.
Isn't that a sexy thought of all these nude people sitting around in chairs doing the work?
You can see the objectivists, you know, they would go, well, I'm only objectively nude. Mark would be there, I'm subjectively and intrinsically nude. And then there would be the solipsis nudes who don't know that other people are nude, for all you philosophy majors. Anyway, we're going to do the Freedom Store first. So those of you who don't know this specific approach get a chance to see it. And those of you who do know it get a chance to see it. So both of you get a chance to see it, and that's okay. And for Stevie Wonder, wouldn't you like it? Wouldn't it be great if they had, you know how they've always got these little people doing the hand puppet moves for the deaf, for the hearing impaired? Wouldn't it be funny if those people went over to Stevie Wonder's house and had conversations behind his back? I thought it would be one of those kinds of things that you could do to tease him. You know, or sort of heat up the toaster for when he does the Braille. Anyway, oh, come on. Stevie Wonder thought it was funny, and he gets out of the hospital any day. So, Freedom Store works like this. I don't know whether you know, but I opened many, many years ago a Freedom Store. A lot of times we think that when we're talking about freedom, that it's a matter of you got to convince the person the following premises. A is A. Existence exists. Consciousness is conscious. There you convince, and the person goes, say what? And if they don't understand how that all derives to freedom, you've got to derive it from first principles. This is the old approach. In fact, that usually is not the best approach. Usually, later on, you can bring them around to having a boring interpretation of freedom. But in fact, you can market freedom just like you can market tacos or books or anything else. It is a matter not just of selling and not just of persuading, but of convincing, of documenting, of showing evidence for. But there's a specific way that makes it very, very easy to do. And I call it my freedom store. So what I'm going to do is, this is like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Hi, boys and girls. Can you say epistemology? Epistemology. We're not talking about urine samples. We're talking epistemology. Men qua men is not kinky sex either. So, those of you who want to come to my freedom store, you got to dig it. On the outside, we just opened for business up here in London. On the front of the store, it says, the Freedom Store, where freedom is our only product. Hey, what a product. We're going to have more customers than we know what to do with. Now, let's take it like a business. Let's say we're running this freedom store as a business. We want people to come in, okay? We want them to patronize our store. We want them to join up. We want them to become regulars. We want them to be loyal customers of our freedom store. So what we do is, we bring them in, we put the advertising in the paper. Now, here's the first way that most freedom advocates mess up their freedom store. The advertising. The advertising begins with the following headline. Dear stupid, hope you have brains enough to show. If you don't, you deserve what you get. Brought to you by the NDP, the Conservatives, and the others. Okay? Now, this ad doesn't draw anybody. Does the Freedom Store franchisees, because these are all franchise operations, you know that Mark and Robert are not going to let this out of their hands because they're smart. If you leave it up to the mob, you know what happens? You end up like the Libertarian Party up here and nothing happens. That's why you run it like a franchise. Now, this Freedom Store realizes that people aren't coming in on the ad. Now, what do you do if you're a business person and nobody responds to your ad?
Throw sex in it.
Throw sex in it.
Change your advertising.
Change your advertising. Marx was a variation on change your advertising. Oh my God.
Let's get a ZZ Top video or something. You know,
ZZ Top, that's right. What you do is you change your advertising. So what you do is, if people are not responding to your way of communicating about freedom, all of your communication is an advertisement for your philosophy. It's all an advertisement. You are an advertisement. You got to remember something. You are the first freedom advocate that most people will ever meet. Frightening when you think about Mark being the first freedom advocate most people will meet. No, actually, it might be good. We might interest a group of interesting people. Embezzlers for Jesus. I can hardly wait. Now, but think about it. Think of all the people you talk to about freedom. How many of them have ever heard about it? How many have ever heard about individual freedom before talking to you? Not many. You're the first person that they will ever meet. So you're your own advertisement. You got to remember that. Now that doesn't mean you have to dress for success and look like a yuppie from hell. But it does mean that you have to realize that you are an advertisement. You are a communication for these people. Now, you've also got the sign on the door. The advertisement gets them in the door. Come on in. We've got freedom. Freedom has something for everybody. Freedom has something for everybody. It's got something for the poor, something for the rich, something for the middle class. It's got something for black and white. It's got something for women and men. It's got something for gay people and straight people. By the way, that reminds me of a story. I was once at a John Birch Society meeting. Has anybody ever heard of the John Birch Society? You guys heard about them? You know, Eisenhower's a commie and we're a little concerned about these things. I went to a John Birch Society meeting, and I don't know why that reminded me of it, but it's important to tell you. And I had one of the Birchers come up to me. The Birchettes are the women, the Birchers are the men. One of the John Birch Society members come up to me and go, hey, I like some of the stuff you say, but this homosexuality stuff being legal, I don't like. What are you going to do about it? So I used Michael's sneaky advertising technique. I said, hey guy, let me explain something to you about homosexuality. Look, you see these gay guys? Notice how most of them are real good looking? They are really dressed to kill or maim, right? Now, for every gay man that there is in the world, there's another gay man. There's a certain symmetry. think about it as a heterosexual man. They just took two very good-looking men out of competition for the women and left them for you and me.
Besides, they can't breathe, so they'll die off anyway, right?
And then he said, I hadn't thought of that. And I says, think about it. They won't bother your daughter either. And I says, however, lesbianism is a crime against nature that must be snuffed out. You know? Certain concessions we weren't willing to make. It sort of opened as, this is not a regular argument I would recommend, but it sure worked with this dummy. And it sunk in, but it's actually true if you think about it. You ever notice how most of the gay guys are really good looking, and most of the lesbian women are sort of, ordinary? So it's no loss. They look like, they look like gym coaches with comfortable shoes. Boy, can she hit a ball. What a tomboy. Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so it's no great loss, and the butcher bought into it, and he didn't see anything wrong with buying in now. All right, now you got people in the door to the Freedom Store. Now let me tell you about the shelves. Every store has product, right? If you're in rags to riches, right? You're in the rags business, right? You're a very expensive rags business. Is that not true, Brenda? We're talking about very, very, very expensive clothing. Other people are in other businesses. It could be anything from hamburgers to books to dirty magazines to under-the-counter dirty magazines. You don't have dirty magazines? No, we wash them off before we sell them. Okay. Anyway, everybody's got product in their store. Now, our Freedom Store has product too. And you know what we've got on the walls? We've got shelves of freedom. Now, usually when people think about freedom, they ask you, are you left-wing or right-wing? Or are you middle of the bird? What are you people? And the answer is, we're above it all. We don't fit into that crummy little spectrum. On the wall are things that would be perceived as being so-called left-wing or right-wing. See, on these shelves on this side of the wall, on the right, or the left, depending on which side you look at them from, are your civil liberties issues like Sunday closings, issues like censorship, issues like personal freedom, what you do in your own bedroom, between you and a chicken. I don't care. It's not my life. Colonel Sanders has a note for you. Things such as no draft here in Canada. Things such as your right against reasonable search and seizure. All your civil liberties issues and your social issues. We've got something for the poor. We've got something for the elderly. We've got something for black. We've got something for Hispanic. We've got something for Oriental, but not a driver license. Wait a second, Korean joke. You know how to make a Korean man blind? Put him behind a windshield. I had a friend used to say, it's a dog-eat-dog world, except for the Koreans. There it's a Korean-eat-dog world. Anyway. Oh, hey, I never said it was nice.
Edit that out of there.
Anyway, on the other side of the room are these shelves and shelves of economic freedom. And it's either on the right or the left, depending on how you look at it. Now, over there are things such as an end to minimum wage laws, lower taxes, say zero. I'm a gradualist on the tax matter. Issues such as free trade, issues that have to do with your wallet, that have to do with your ability to do business. So we've got economic issues on one side, we've got civil liberty issues on the other side. Now, people begin to stream into the store because they've heard about this great new business, the Freedom Store. We made a mistake. The first day we hired a clerk who was hardcore. This is the person that read every volume of Ludwig von Mises, Bauer, Ayn Rand, Frederick Bastiat. We're talking all the way back to Menger. We're talking all the way back to John Stuart Mill. We're talking about reading everything you could ever want to know about freedom. And no one ever wanted to ask. Now, this was the ideologue salesperson. People come in, and he wants to make sure that they know what they're getting. But I'm going to make it painful to you personally. You come in the door, and you say, little old lady comes in and says, "Excuse me, I'd like an opportunity to earn a little extra money and not be taxed on it." And he says to her, "That's great. Let me show you about legalizing heroin for school children. It's right over here." Answer, "What about legalizing heroin for school children?" "Oh, how much your kids make?" "Well, oh, aren't we cruel?" Anyway, the little old lady is coming in asking for one thing. And this person is going to make damn sure that they know that they got to buy everything in the store. You want to come in my store, you got to buy the heroin position. You want to come in my store, you got to buy the pornography issue. You want to come in my store, you've got to buy all of the civil liberties issue in addition to the one that you came in for. And then this young man turns around and she's gone. Where did she go? God, she ran fast. I thought she had arthritis. Gee whiz, I'm really concerned. Maybe we got some steroids from an athlete from the country. Ooh, who knows? Anyway, second person, Ben Johnson joke. Take two. Anyway, now, the next person comes in because he really connects with a civil freedom issue. He comes in because he's really concerned with the right to print what he wants or read what he wants. Here's someone very, very, very concerned with intellectual and spiritual and censorship issues. And he comes in the store and says, what can you tell me about your position on censorship and the right to publish and the right to read what I choose to read or not read what I choose to read? Of course, we have our button on that says, I read banned books. This young man says, hey, it's not enough this guy's good on censorship issues. Sir, did you realize we've got a minimum wage position? Think of what that'll do for black teenage unemployment. Come on over here, Greg. I'm going to show you not only that, but tax cuts for your friends in the universities. Okay. Where did he go? He was pretty quick. Well, that's understandable. He had his Reeboks on. He's down the street. Now, think about it a second. If you're a business person, how many people here in business? Raise your hands. Okay? What happens if you don't serve your customers' needs? They find someone who will. Is that true? You know, even hookers have a policy that the customer comes first. Now, oh, hey, that Mark told me that I didn't want to tell it, but Mark said tell it. They'll love it.
No, my joke was that they'll find another man.
The what?
That doesn't make sense.
Another unfunny joke by Mark. Take two. I like the. See, Mark has an ability to accelerate the failure curve. You know, sort of upgrade it. He's on that steep part. Now, he's got a million of them, yes. So did Edsel. Okay, now, what was the matter with this clerk? This clerk did not sell them what they wanted to buy. People come to the Freedom Party and they come to the Freedom Store for a reason. And it might only be one reason. Now, dig it like this. You go on to Mickey D's, McDonald's, right?
Is that what you mean by that?
Mickey D's, yeah.
I thought there really was a chain.
No, that's what black kids call it in the States. It's Mickey D's. I go to Mickey D, can't you see? I can rap and do all that crap. Oh, well. You know, for black kids who can't sing. Okay, now, you walk into McDonald's, right? And a kid comes in and says, all right, now we fired our little ideologue here, our hardcore advocate of freedom. We got a real clerk in the store, right? Someone with an interest in the business. And we sent this guy over to work at McDonald's. And he takes the same attitude toward McDonald's customers. In walks a young kid and he says, excuse me, I'd like a cheeseburger and I'd like a little bitty order of fries and I want an orange drink to go. And the guy says, oh, wait a minute. You don't just come into my store and just order a cheeseburger, a small order of fries, and an orange drink. Buster, you see that menu up there? There are everything there that you want. Son, you want to come into my store, you've got to get a large cheeseburger, small cheeseburger, large fries, small fries. McDLT, you got to get the breakfast stuff too. You got to get all the things that come with it. You got to get the chicken McNuggets. You got to get the large, small, and medium Cokes. You got to get the large, small, and medium sodas. You got to get the large, small, and medium Dairy Queens there too. You want to come in my store, if you don't buy the whole menu, hit the road. Now, I don't know, maybe I missed something. But I thought when you went into a restaurant, you didn't have to buy everything to sell. Maybe you just came in for a couple things. Now, if Mickey D's took this attitude, if McDonald's took this attitude toward their customers, up on the golden arches there'd be a sign, 7 sold, 6 returned. Right? And none of them digested because I don't eat that swill. Okay, now, and we're talking about a company where the steers boycott. All they can do is find, you know, South African steers that have died of some dread disease, or maybe South American that have been imported, brought across the border as Nicaraguan Sandinistas. I don't know. Now, if he took the attitude, how many people would come back to the store? Not many, right? When people come to the Freedom Store, maybe they only come for something on this shelf. And that's okay. It's okay to vote for Mark Emery on one issue only. It's okay to vote for Robert Matz on one issue only. It's okay to join if only one thing interests you. Because I'll tell you something about the Freedom Store. We got stuff on our shelves that nobody else does. Is that true or not true? And it doesn't matter whether they buy your whole store. Let's look at it like a business. When I go into Mickey D's, pretend that I went there. Pretend I lost my taste. Pretend I deserve to go there. If I buy their cheeseburger 3 or 4 times and I like it, now here's a fantasy. But let's say I like it. I'm going to come back and sooner or later I'm going to try their goddamn fish sandwich. And I'm going to try their big fries. And I'm also maybe even going to try their DLT. They got a special version in Canada. You got the cold side and the colder side. Oh, chilly joke. Anyway, it was better than Ben Johnson's steroids, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, let's compare. How many like the Ben Johnson?
Oddly enough, those steroids are in that McDLT.
Of course, chickens are given steroids.
That's right, and so is beef. So you're going to be Ben Johnson in no time. So.
What you say? Now, people come into the Freedom Store because they connect with one issue or 2 issues. When they come into your store, if they like the way you serve your product, if they like the quality of what they're buying, what are they going to do? Are they going to become regular customers and maybe come back, not only for that product, but do you think they might say, I really like your stand on censorship. What's this about Sunday closes? What's the big deal about it? Why should I be interested in that? Do you think they might hear you out if they like your other product? Sure they will. But there seems to be an attitude among some advocates of freedom, which fortunately is dying out, that if you don't buy the whole ball of wax, they don't want you in the door. It's okay to just vote for a Freedom Party candidate on one issue, for one reason, for one election. You know why? Because votes are counted, they're not weighed. Nobody, can you imagine people at the Board of Elections go, oh, this is a hardcore vote. This is worth 8 or 10 of those goddamn NDP votes. Give Emery 8 or 10. Oh, this is Robert Metz. He gets paid also. That's worth 15. They don't weigh votes. They just count them. Now, people come to your store and they like the way you treat them. And they like the quality of the product. And they like what you're selling them. What does that do for your brand name? What does that do for your brand name?
Give you good word of mouth.
You get good word of mouth. Even people who don't agree with Mark Emery, the minority, find themselves saying, yeah, but I got to have confidence in his integrity. He is what he says he is. He's not a hypocrite. He's straightforward. He is what he says he is. And so is the Freedom Party. If they like the quality. Alan Greenspan, in an essay in Capitalism and an Ideal, talked about your biggest asset as a business person is your company's reputation, is your product's reputation, is the fact that people know it to be good quality and consistent, and you deliver what you say you're going to deliver. The first Freedom Party person who gets elected that wimps out on an issue that he knows he oughtn't will destroy that credibility. And everyone that follows through just as he said he would, or just as she said she would, builds that product credibility. When people come to the store, they know Freedom Store, that's quality. Freedom Store, you know what you're getting. Freedom Store, they have truth in labeling. They said they'd do it, they did it. They have integrity, they have follow through, their word is good. And they also know something else. They know that they can't get a lot of the stuff anywhere else in town. Is anybody here really into specialty foods, maybe eating Indian or Pakistani foods? All right, I like it. I'm really into all over the world foods except for real Greek foods, greasy, I can't eat that stuff, right? Do you have a favorite restaurant? Do you? Okay. You like the quality of the food and you can't get it everywhere else. What happens if you go into Mickey D's and go, I'd like some sub gum? Say what? I'd like some mugu gai pan? Say. The chick's off today. What do you get for minimum wage? You know, you get a kid bacon, right? You can't buy the product at McDonald's. You can't buy it at the Colonel's. They know there's only a couple places in town you can buy it. And those are at restaurants that deal in that kind of food. So when people want the food, where do they go? They go where it's sold. They go where the quality is good. They go where the reputation is good. One of the biggest assets you got with Freedom Party is the fact they know they can't get some of these things anywhere else. And they know that if they want it, they got to come to you. Isn't that great? It's like being an exclusive distributor for a high-quality product. Freedom. Now, when people come into your store, you ever, when you go into a store, do you browse a little bit? Even when you know what you're going to buy? Does anybody do this? Do you browse? I do. You got people that do that with the Freedom Party. They go, the only reason I'm voting for Emory is because of the Sunday closings. I really want my people to work 7 days a week. I'm into it. I'm teasing. Isn't that the myth? You're going to make them work 7 days a week? They don't work when they show anyway, so who cares? So anyway, that's an employer's point of view. The employee's point of view is he gets what he deserves. They're both right. So, what happens is people come in and they look at your literature. They look at the Freedom Flyer. All this is an advertisement. All of that is product. All of that talks about your integrity. Everything you say, everything you do talks about your integrity and your quality. That's why principle is important. That's why honesty is important. Because when people come in, even if it's just this one issue, even if it's just the Pan Am Games, people come in and they browse. And as they browse, they grant you credibility because when they came in the door, you sold them what you said you would. It did what you said it would do. You've got built-in credibility. Why do people keep going back to McDonald's? Because they really do like the food, and they really do know they're going to get consistent quality, such that it is. And they keep coming back because they know no matter where they buy it in Canada, the US, or even Japan, it's going to be the same stuff, right? Frightening, isn't it? But that's equally true of the Freedom Party. They know that there's not a dime's worth of difference between this guy and this guy when they're in office. They're both going to vote to cut taxes and deregulate and delegislate. And they're both going to vote against censorship and for freedom of expression. And they're both going to move in the direction of better living through less government. Because there's no government like no government. It'll sink in later. Anyway, what happens with the Freedom Store when you take a marketing attitude rather than an argumentative attitude is you realize you're a salesperson for freedom. You're a sales rep for the Freedom Party whenever you discuss ideas. These are your values. Every time you express your values. The only reason you're in the store is because those are your values. That speaks to your integrity. And the reason when people come in they browse is because they like the product and they're willing to look at some of your other stuff. It happens in clothes stores. People will come in for a specific kind of clothing, and then the next time they're in the mall, they'll look at the store to see what else you might have. Have you had that happen when you have inquiries in the Freedom Party? Of course you have. You've had people join on one issue. Next thing you know, a year, 2 years later, they get reactive because they've sold themselves on your integrity and on your reputation. The marketing perspective, as long as you realize that you're always selling something. It's like Hank Reardon said in Atlas Shrugged. He said, I realized that my life, I am a trader, T-R-A-D-E-R. I'm exchanging a value for a value. Every time you sell an idea or persuade someone about the freedom ideas, you're giving them a value. Here's the test. Are they better off or worse off with freedom? Are they better off or worse off supporting the Freedom Party? How can they have decent integrity? If they want good things for their family, good things for themselves, choice for their adulthood, how can they vote any way else? Where else is there? Here's the alternative. Quality, pureness, truth in labeling of the Freedom Party, or they get to go to adulterated food with salmonella and God knows what else at the other stores. Because that's what they're going to get. They're going to get snake oil from the other parties. And it's good, maybe they want snake oil. But as long as you take this marketing perspective, as long as you realize that you're in the marketing business, you start taking different attitudes than if you think you're in the arguing business. First thing you do, what do you do when someone comes in and says, I want such and such from your store? What's the first thing you do?
Here it is, right over here.
Here it is right over here. Oh, we have a couple other things that are similar too you might also want to look at. Don't you? Every time you go into McDonald's, don't they say, would you also like a pie? And you go, no. That really depresses this little 16-year-old girl who has pimple problems, right? And you want to ruin her life anyway, don't you? All right. But, in fact, they find that when they offer that little pie, their pie sales increase about 34%. When you offer a little bit more, absolutely, we've got the censorship issue. By the way, we've got some other free speech issues. Would you like to see some? Sure I would. Even if they don't buy them, they're going to browse, aren't they? And they're going to consider them. And even if they don't buy them today, they might buy them later. It's a little like dating. Even if the person doesn't take you up on the offer now, things might change later. You don't know, right? And it's like doing business. Even if you don't want to buy from that clothes store today, things might change tomorrow. You might go on a diet. You might have a face transplant. You don't know. You might decide you want to buy from there the other day. But as we take a marketing perspective about freedom, how does that affect how we present our freedom point of view? We realize that rudeness doesn't work in business, don't we? We realize that courtesy actually pays off. You got to remember, one of the reasons most people are courteous, they get fired if they're not. People stop coming to their store if they're not. And people treat them better if they're courteous. Don't you find that when you treat people in a friendly fashion, they treat you pretty much the same? Now think about it intuitively. And I want to use Mark as an example because he's so obvious on this one. Intuitively, you would say that some of the things that Mark says about his life in full hearing distance of little old ladies and other people in his store would blow some people's minds. We're presupposing minds to blow. Okay, now, you'd think that some of these people would get freaked, and you think that someone would go, Jesus, I don't want anything to do with it. But his way of presenting himself, his friendly, matter-of-fact, non-threatening kind of way, makes a lot of things you think they wouldn't be open to, very open to. Because of the salesperson, the sales rep. He's his own advertisement for himself as well as the Freedom Party. That's equally true in your own life. I have people tell me that they get shut down on political arguments. I told them I gave up arguing about politics. I discuss it now. And people ask for more of the product because of the way I present it and because of the way you present it. If you hadn't succeeded at some of this, there'd only be one here today, right? And if you hadn't succeeded at all, you wouldn't have gotten good turnouts for people like Walter Block and other people, right? As you take a marketing perspective on the ideas, you are marketing your ideas. Their product is tangible and as real as hamburgers, clothing, steel girders, and gold bullion. As a salesperson, what happens if you take good care of your clientele? What do?
Somebody else.
They come back and they tell somebody else. Word of mouth. Word of mouth is the best advertisement the party's got. People saying, I didn't think those Freedom Party people had a lot to offer, but I went to one of their get-togethers, and they were okay. They were really nice people. That helps sell the product. That helps get new customers in the door. Anybody here see a good movie in the last 3 months? Did you recommend it?
Oh, endless.
Endlessly. I do the same thing. Whenever I go see a new movie, everybody knows it. When I see a bad movie, I panic like mad. I've killed more movies than Siskel and Ebert combined. And for good reason. The good movie should be snuffed out. It's evolution in action. The bad one should be snuffed out, rather. Now, the good one should survive. We want the dinosaurs to die and the mammals to, wail and flail and kick butt. Okay, now, if you take the marketing perspective, if you thought you were marketing your political ideas and your economic ideas, what would happen when you're having gatherings and discussing the ideas with the people and someone came up with something you disagreed with? When you're selling stuff in your store, if you show somebody a product they don't like, do you argue with them? Very often, even if you think it's right for them, don't you ask questions? Well, gee, what don't you like about it? Tell me a little bit about it. Just asking the question, very often they'll talk to you about it. Oh, what sort of things do you like? Well, I like this. Oh, I've got some of that over there. You might even skip the product and move on to the stuff that you do have in common. Got a point, Mark?
I was just going to say, in our store, we go right to what they do like. What have you read that you liked before, and I'll suggest something similar.
Exactly. If you treat it like a business, all of the things start working. Now, this Freedom Store is a different way of presenting your ideas. It is a marketing perspective. It is a free trade perspective. It is a free market perspective. It is a position of, you're not begging people to join the Freedom Party. You treat it almost like it's a charity. I don't think it's going anywhere, but I go with it because I'm dumb. In a past life, I was a lemming, and I've evolved to a higher life form. The reason you join the Freedom Party is real straightforward. It is not an act of charity, and it's not just an act of self-defense. It's the smartest thing you can do. Where else are you going to go? Who else are you going to be with? That's the smart, good thing to do. You get values from the Freedom Party. And that's equally true of the store. Now, if nobody comes in the door at your store, do you say, well, I guess I'll throw out this good quality product, or do you change the ad? Change the ad. And what happens if that still doesn't work? What else do you do?
You try other methods too.
You try other methods. You change the ad again and again and again until it works. Now, I want to break this down and personalize it. This is true of every conversation you have about freedom. It is true about every discussion you have about a specific issue. If you take a marketing perspective, people come back. People ask you stuff. I have, in my younger life, alienated people about freedom. I usually don't do that now. And the reason I don't is I take this perspective in every encounter. You never win an argument with a customer. And neither does he. Because you both lose when he walks out the door and doesn't buy. He loses the good he would have bought. You lose the good you would have got. That's the way it works. Now, if you were running a business, if your freedom ideas were a business, what else would you do to make them work? How else would you build your business? Ideas? Beg pardon? Advertise? What else would you do?
Improve the product.
Improve the product. What else would you do? Cut your prices. Okay. What else would you do? How about improve your service?
You don't want to spoil them.
Yeah, you don't want to spoil it. It's like IBM. Do you know why IBM dominates the computer world? As far as I can tell, they've got one reason. They're the only company that consistently answers their phones. Hey, their product is not state-of-the-art. They're middle of the road on computers. But by God, your computer goes down. You got 4 or 5 reps in your store, your place of business, and by God, they fix it. That service brings them back again and again, even when they wanted the apple. Now, as you go during the week, this week coming up, I want you to remember that you're marketing a product. And remember that you are the Freedom Store. You are the franchisee. You have quality control, you have a product, and you're marketing it. And what's more, you're the sole employee of your own little franchise. But it's part of this big chain called the Freedom Party. If you take that attitude, what's going to happen with your conversations about freedom?
You'll be more confident for one.
They'll be more confident. If you know that you got something good and you feel comfortable about it, what else happens?
You tell everybody.
You tell everybody. How many here have felt at some time in their life, maybe in the last 6 months, a little uncomfortable about talking about their freedom philosophy? The more confident you feel in the product, the more you know what a good product you have, the more willing you are to discuss it. That affects how you do business. Now, is this obvious? It is, but how many times do we argue with people about our ideas in a very aggressive way? How many times do we prove them wrong? I'll show you you're wrong, and I'm going to show you in detail in front of your friends. I'm going to humiliate you in front of your mother, and I'm doing it for your good, goddammit. They always do it for your good when they beat the shit out of you, don't they? My mother used to do this. I'm doing this for your benefit. I wish you'd have not thought so well of my concerns at that point. This is why I sort of walk a little strange. Now, we're going to take a break. But I want you to remember something. This is obvious. Write it down, because you're going to forget it. I forget it from time to time. You're in the freedom business. You're marketing the product. You're not trying to ram it down their throat. It doesn't work. You cannot aggressively jam product down someone's throat. People hate to be sold, but they love to buy. People hate to be sold, but they love to buy. People hate to be beaten down in an argument, but they love to ask questions and convince themselves. It's 9:52. Let's take a 10-minute break.
For those who care, tea should be arriving shortly.
We'll be tested. And anybody flunks has all their persuasion taken back. So you better remember that. It's content time again, folks. And now, a very good question to keep asking yourself about the Freedom Store is, if this were a business activity, next time you have a discussion, if this were a business activity, how would I handle it? And you'll handle it much better than if you think it's your job to beat them into submission with these good old-fashioned freedom arguments. It's important to coerce people for freedom, you know. Just remember that.
Force them to be free.
Force them to be free. This is for your own good. It's like H.L. Mencken used to say that democracy is the theory that the common man knows what he wants and deserves to get it good and hard. I thought that was good. The Buddha was born a prince in India. His name was Gautama. And he was very, very rich. Very rich. And one day he went out walking and he realized that there was poverty and suffering throughout the land. And he wasn't victim to it because of his wealth, insulated him from it. This is wealth, by the way, stolen from the other people. Let us remember. And Gautama decided he wanted to walk away from it. He decided that this was not for him, and he decided he was going to go on a holy quest. And he did, and he wandered the countryside to seek enlightenment. And one day while sitting under which tree?
Bodhi tree.
Very good, the Bodhi tree. I got to check. Some people know. One day while sitting under the Bodhi tree, he experienced enlightenment. Later in the Buddha's life, after he had attracted thousands and thousands and thousands of Indians and other people, Ceylonese, Pakistani, and so on, to his point of view, to Buddhism, he found that he had some parents who didn't like what he was doing to their children. You'll have this happen with all movements. The Buddha one day was sitting in his hut, and in came the father of one of his new disciples. And the father said to him, "You are no good, you are a rotten influence on my child," and proceeded to rail the Buddha at great length. He described everything that was wrong with Buddhism. He described everything that was wrong with his influence. And he told him all the things that were ruining this fine child of his. And this went on for almost an hour. And the Buddha did not argue with the man. He listened. He said, tell me more, tell me more. And he listened and he listened and he listened. And when the man had finally run out of steam, he said, "Are you done?" And the man said, "Yes." And he says, "I have a question for you." He said, "If you prepared a great feast and invited a friend over, and you had all these wonderful foods cooked, and your friend didn't come to dinner, what would you do?" And the man looked at the Buddha and he says, "Well, I suppose I'd have to eat it myself." And the Buddha said, "That's fine. You prepared a meal for me and I'm not eating." Remember that when you're criticized. Remember that when you have people that don't agree with you. You don't have to eat it. There's a second story. I love collecting parables and metaphors and stories and inflicting them on my friends for their own good. Two holy men were walking up to the particularly narrow place in the Ganges. And there was a woman dressed in her finest raiment. And if you've ever been to a very, very poor country, people try very, very hard to put on their best clothes at certain times. And this is their only set of good clothes. They don't have a lot of good clothes. And this woman was standing by the banks. She couldn't go across because there wasn't a ferry. And she didn't want to get her clothing destroyed in the muddy water. One of the holy men looked at her and picked her up and carried her across in his arms because he saw her dilemma, and he placed her down. She thanked him and walked off. And these two holy men walked for 3 miles. And finally, in incessant anger, the second holy man looked at him and he says, "You know our religious order forbids us to touch women. You know that." And his friend says, "Ah, yes. I put her down on the other side of the river. Why are you still carrying her?" That'll be true in your arguments and discussions about freedom as much as anything else. Why are you still carrying it with you? You can set it down anytime you like, and you don't have to eat the meal. And these will go with you during the week, and you'll remember these stories when people criticize you, or don't like you, or don't approve of you, or for whatever reason don't want what you have. Is that all right with you? It's okay for people not to fully agree. It's okay for them not to fully like you. It shows poor taste on their part, but can't have everything. Remember those stories as you go during the week, but you won't remember them this week. What's going to happen is something interesting. We have what's called time-release metaphors here at the Art of Political Persuasion. About 2 weeks from now, you're going to remember one of the stories or the other after a particularly unpleasant argument or discussion with someone you really care about. And you're going to smile and realize that you don't have to eat the meal or keep carrying the girl. We're going to talk about self-responsibility. I said it's content time. I'm going to come back to this concept, not just politically, but personally. This is something that is absolutely central to my belief system. I'm writing a book called Self-Reliance Reborn. And it's going to be out, I hope, early next year. And part of what I'm talking about is what's going on here. I mentioned the other night Erich Fromm's book, Escape from Freedom. And I said, you know, Erich Fromm really got it wrong. Erich Fromm thought that people ran from freedom. They embraced totalitarianism, Nazism, communism, fascism in Italy, because they were trying to run from freedom. And I said that he got it wrong. They are not trying to escape freedom. They are trying to escape personal responsibility. The idea that your life might be fully in your own hands to some people is rather frightening. The idea that you might make your own choices, and for better or worse, for rich or poor, they're your choices and your consequences. And that scares some people. Other people find it an exhilarating, empowering belief. I fall into that second category. We're going to talk about it just briefly with regard to politics, and in very focused way about your personal life. Because whether you like it or not, responsibility is not something you assume, it's something you admit. You are responsible for your life whether you like it or not. You can't get out of it. It's like fish. There are no fish that aren't swimming in water. Except for Sarah Leaf Fish and, you know, Mrs. whatever her name is. Now, one of the beauties of the self-responsibility idea, I like to come back to my favorite novels. My third favorite novel is a novel by Ayn Rand called Atlas Shrugged. And I'll give you the two favorites during the break if anybody's interested. See, because any objectivist here, objectivist background, that's mine. See, contrary to popular belief, Atlas Shrugged was not Rand's best novel. It was her most important, but not her best. Her best novel was The Fountainhead. It was better written. And we can discuss that at length sometime down the road. And if you disagree, it's all right. You're entitled to be wrong and be responsible. So I want you to know I acknowledge your wrongness and I respect it. One of the interesting things about Atlas Shrugged, if you examine the villains and the heroes, who here has read the book? Please raise your hand. Okay. The interesting thing about Atlas Shrugged is not just the division of people into producers and parasites, rational and mystical, or rational and irrational. Let's be more direct here. But you can also divide the heroes and the villains into two other positions: responsible and irresponsible. Every one of the Rand heroes in Atlas Shrugged wore self-responsibility like the mark of Cain. It's like a kiss from God. I'll tell you something about it. You remember whenever you saw the bad guys and they were trying to avoid the consequences of their behavior, they come up with phrases like, "It's not my fault," "I didn't know," "No one told me." Remember the first line from Jim Taggart in the book? "Don't bother me, don't bother me, don't bother me." That's his whole life. Life is a bother to people who don't want to be responsible. When the rails didn't run on time, did Dagny say, "Well, I guess we need a government edict, a little more regulation to help me out"? She went and got it done. When Hank Reardon had trouble with the run of Reardon Metal, what did he do? He worked a little harder. He did a little more. He took responsibility to produce those results. If you want to have a fun reread, try rereading Atlas Shrugged and look at the level of responsibility that all of the Rand heroes took. Every single one of them took their life fully into their own hands. And those that were developing began to take their life into their own hands. That's equally true of some other novels that are favorites. By the way, the villains, if you want to look at the irresponsibility position, what it comes down to is pretending to be a victim, the victim position. If you want to play a victim, you will be a victim. For example, anybody here have an accident-prone friend? You know anybody? I'm not asking you to drive home with them. Do you know someone who does this? Okay. Do you realize that there have been studies that show, in fact, accident-prone people have 14 times as many accidents as the national average in the U.S.? 14 times. Now, statistically, that's, it's like God goes, "Time to get ziggy again." There are also safety-prone people who never have accidents. If you interview the accident-prone people, they believe in luck. They believe in good fortune. They believe in someone will take care of me. Somehow, someone, in some way, will do something that'll save my ass. And guess what? They get what they deserve. That's God's way of teaching them responsibility. And she is a firm taskmaster. Anybody here read Heinlein? Robert Heinlein? I love Heinlein. He's a wonderful man. He was just such a beautiful person. Heinlein novels, if you read them, they also have a leitmotif of responsibility. All of his heroes were people that didn't sit around on their butt and wait for something to happen. First of all, it would have made a boring novel. Think about it. Today John Galt sits on his ass. This is TV watching day, 2 chapters. Robert Heinlein, it's called Starship Loafers. They're going to sit around and wait for someone else to take over the galaxy, and when it's all done, they're going to bitch to their kids. No, every one of his heroes takes responsibility and makes it happen. The moon is a harsh mistress. Not only do you have responsible people, but they've got a computer called Mike, which is named after Mycroft, which is Sherlock Holmes' smarter brother. Another piece of memorabilia for those of you. Not only do they have responsible people in the book, but the computer takes responsibility for leading the revolution. My kind of computer, a responsible, self-aware, conscious entity. If you go through his other books, Starship Troopers, Stranger in a Strange Land, that was sort of his free love sex thing. And even, he had, if I were going to be religious, that's my kind of religion. I mean, I like the services, okay. Even Mark could get into that. Now, but my favorite for displaying the idea of self-responsibility was a book called The Puppet Masters. The Puppet Masters, there were these little beasties that came down from outer space, and they would attach themselves like parasites. It'd be like having your own Internal Revenue Service agent, following you around, or taxing board. And they hook onto you and they run your body. They tell you what you're going to do and make you go places. Well, Heinlein has a throwaway line in the middle of the book that blew my mind. In America, they discover these little beasties and they're going to wipe them out. In the course of their move to get rid of these animals or these beasts from outer space, they discover that these outer space creatures have been in Russia for 2 years and no one noticed. That is one of the genius of Heinlein. But what's interesting is he's always talking about responsibility. All of his characters, all of his heroes are responsible, get-it-done people. Now, I work with a friend of mine. His name is Andre Maru. He was elected as a libertarian in Alaska, which is like Freedom Party up here in the States. Andre Maru was elected, and he went into office, and he had a simple method of dealing with issues. You know how the bureaucrats, when they want to snow you, they'll give you a pile of stuff so thick? He gets to the bottom line real quick. He says, is this going to increase personal freedom or decrease it? Real simple. Is it going to increase individual freedom or decrease it? And that was a simple criterion. If it's going to increase it, he votes for it. If it's going to decrease it, he votes against it. He didn't need to see the details. You know, it's like, here are the details on how this food will kill you. I don't need the details. I'm not going to eat it. I have a way that I analyze legislation. Not only do I analyze it based on, is this going to increase or decrease individual freedom? I ask, is this going to increase or decrease individual responsibility? And if you want a way of analyzing legislation, try that. Just ask that question. Those are both the same question in different ways. Now, every time government takes responsibility, it diminishes freedom. There's an attitude that government seizes freedom from us. Wrong. What they do is assume responsibility. Don't worry about poverty. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about unemployment. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about your future, retirement. We'll take care of it. Yeah, right. You believe this? Some people do. Because it's so easy to let the government take the responsibility. They want to do it, fine. I don't have to worry about it. There's a book called Learn Helplessness. For those of you who are psych majors, you might want to pick it up. It's written by a guy named Martin Seligman. He did experiments in animal helplessness called Learn Helplessness, Martin Seligman. Did everybody here read the article I did called Welfare Pigeons? I wrote that a couple years ago. Did you read it? All right, what it boils down to is this. They took some pigeons. I love what psychologists do. They're animal sadists. They say, let's do something that'll screw up animals and call it a test. So they get 3 groups of pigeons. All right, group number 1, they feed, no matter what. You know, no matter what they do, they feed them. Group number 2, they leave hungry. Group number 3, if they learn a task, they feed them. They're in a pen, and if they step on a pedal, they get fed. As soon as they step on a pedal, a pellet comes down. Sooner or later, they step on the pedal again, another pellet comes down, and they go, I know how to figure this out. Step on the pellet comes down. It's sort of like punching a time clock at work. Show up for work, they pay me a check. Show up for work, they pay me a check. Show up for work, they pay me a check. No comparison. I don't want you to think there's any similarity whatever between people and pigeons, because I wouldn't dream of telling you that. Mark will tell you later how we're behaving like pigeons. Now, after they get these pigeons, now the control group, remember, is going hungry. The welfare pigeons get fed no matter what they step on or don't step on. And the smart pigeons, we're talking about the overachiever pigeons, once they step on the pedal, they get fed. Now they take these pigeons and they put them in a second cage. In the second cage, they only get fed if they peck at a lighted pedal. They've got a couple pedals around there. They've got to get the lighted one. As soon as they figure it out, boom. Now what happens with the group? Well, the ones that learn to step on the pedal to get their pellet, they learn quick. These are the A-plus pigeons. We're talking about this. These are the magna cum laude pigeons. They learn real well. The group that's hungry, the control group, learns second quickest. And the welfare pigeons don't learn. Why? Because they know they're going to get fed anyway. Then they take the group and they put them in a third cage. And in the third cage, they give them another task that they have to learn. Again, the same thing occurs. The ones that know that the pellet is contingent upon learning something, learn it. They know that it's connected with them learning to do something, they learn it. The hungry pigeons learn it because, as they say in the South, hungry fox hunt best. And the welfare pigeons don't learn much at all. Now, people are not pigeons. We are not animals. We have our rational faculty. But I want you to think for a second about some poor kid in Toronto. Some kid living in a section of the city where his mother is on government welfare. I want you to think of this kid here. His stomach is fed no matter what happens. And every day he sees his mother sitting at home watching TV, getting the food anyway. What does the kid learn? There was a study done by Albert Bandura, B-A-N-D-U-R-A. I told you I'm a bookaholic. I told you I'm a psych major. I'll inflict knowledge on you whether you want it or not. Who found out that kids do not learn from what you say to them. They learn by what you do around them. You want to be a good parent, you be a good example. Because that's what good parenting is. That and not striking the kid too often. Be a good example. What does this kid learn from watching his mother sit and watch the television and hang out with her friends and get bored and go down to the market or walk to the mall? What does the kid learn? He learns that it doesn't matter what he does, that it doesn't affect his life. He learns that life is boring and stale and meaningless because that's the kind of life his mom's living. He learns that a man is not necessary in the house because his mom gets more if there isn't a husband there, because by God he ought to be working. She finds it to her economic advantage to live with her and her child. And think about this young kid. One day he's going to grow up and be a parent. And all of that behavior that he learned from his mom, not to try, that someone somehow will take care of him, that he can passively wait for life to carry to him whatever it does. The real tragedy is his life, not ours. If they steal the tax money, we can always make it up, but what about that child's life? It's like the wet nurse in Atlas Shrugged. His life goes down the toilet. His life goes down the sewer. We're not pigeons. But to the extent that child learns it, to the extent that we encourage that on behalf of the government, we're the pigeons. Martin Seligman points out that it is built into us, wired into every mammal on the planet, to want to exercise mastery over our body. Anybody here a parent? Anybody been a parent? Okay. You remember watching your child learn to turn over? I don't know if you remember that. I remember watching my nieces and nephews really stretch to try and learn to turn over. And they don't view it as an effort. It's not like, oh shit, turning over class. Oh God, I hate this. Why can't we go into poop in the pants class? The kids, you watch them, you can watch this smile on their face. They enjoy learning to control their body. They enjoy learning to turn over. They enjoy learning to grab the sides of the crib and partly stand up. It's a joy to learn to master their own body. Have you seen that, parents? Have you seen it? Raise your hand if you've seen it. That is wired into us as mammals. That's equally true if you watch kittens, if you watch puppies, if you watch gerbils, if you watch birds.
How come it's not wired into the machine in a room?
It is. I have to give the line that Kurt Vonnegut gave when someone came into his office and looked at the mess in his study. He says, you think it's messy out here? What do you think it looks like in here? Frightening, isn't it? Now, it is built into children and to animals to learn to exercise control over our bodies and to learn to exercise mastery over ourselves. It's like Brandon talked about in the psychology of self-esteem. There are two built-in drives or desires. One is a desire for pleasure. That's built into us. That's why we have a pleasure-pain mechanism. We learn if you put your thumb on the stove, it hurts, at least if the stove's on. And then if you sit in the microwave and someone kicks it on, it blows your whole day. And we have a desire to exercise mastery over our body, a desire to control our body. Now, what Seligman says is, it's interesting that people learn to control or master their body, to be responsible, to cause their own behavior. But how do we explain helplessness? And he says it's a learned behavior. Helplessness, passivity, playing the victim is a learned behavior. We're taught it every day. Let me go to some other cruel animal experiments he does. Here's one they did with Canadian white mice. Why do they always do it to the goddamn Canadian mice? They never do it to mice from Selma, Alabama. They never do it to mice from Beverly Hills. They never do it with Zsa Zsa Gabor's mice. They always do it with Canadian mice, and you know which mice they are. They're the ones that escaped the saccharine experiments. They're survivors. They take these white mice and they place them in little cages. And you know how in your living room you have that little dial where you can turn the light up just a little bit so you can make it romantic, or turn it down a little bit, the dimmer, just slightly up and down. Well, in these little mice cages, they thought, they kick the light on where it's really bright. And I want to tell you what these white mice do. These white mice don't like it, so they start screwing with the dial, and they turn the light down until it meets their approval. The scientists said, hey, you're not going to get away with this. They flip it back. The mice go, screw you. Roll it back down. The scientist says, well, I guess they don't like light. So they turn it all the way down. The mice go, screw you, and roll it back up until they get it bright as they like it. The scientists turn it back down. The mice go, flip it back up until it's at the level they want. They eliminated every explanatory hypothesis except one. The mice were resisting being manipulated. They refused to put up with this shit from the scientists. They were going to control their environment. Can you imagine trying to tax or regulate these mice? They wouldn't put up with it for a minute. It is built into these mice, just as it's built into cats and dogs, to want to control their own environment. That is natural, normal behavior. You have to train them to be helpless. You have to train them to be passive. You have to teach them to be docile. They did another experiment with adults. I like this one. This is one of my favorites. At least they didn't pick on some goddamn animal. They take these adults, they put them in a room, they say, hi, we're doing a learning experiment. And in the background, there's this loud sound of two Puerto Ricans arguing. Picture that. Traffic, and a crying baby in the next room, and it's all on a tape recorder. The groups are divided into two groups. Now, this is all done during a learning experiment, a memory experiment. Group number one is told, you're going to have to put up with it, do as well as you can, good luck. Group number two says, the noise is kind of bad, but we've got a button here that if you push it, it'll turn the noise off. We'd appreciate it if you wouldn't use the button, but if you really have to, push the button, it'll turn the noise off, and you can continue doing the learning experiment. Well, group number one did not so hot, right? This noise was irritating them and keeping them from learning well. Group number two did very, very well. Those are the ones that had the button. Guess what? Button didn't work. Guess what? Nobody used it anyway. Guess what? Just the illusion of control, the belief that they could control it, enabled them to do better. Isn't that interesting? There's something called attribution theory in psychology. Attribution theory says that what you attribute the outcome to, what you explain it in terms of, determines how you feel about your life. For example, if a young child doesn't do well on a test, and his failure to do well on the test is attributed to his not studying, or his not trying hard enough, you know what he does next time? He studies and tries harder. Do you know what he does if it is attributed to the will of Allah, the fate? That's just the way you're born, kid. It's genetic because you're Hispanic or black or female or Guatemalan or white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, non-Jewish, whatever it is. All of the above. If you attribute it to circumstances that are in the child's control, guess what he does? He improves every time he takes the test. Guess who came up with this brilliant idea? That same son of a bitch, Bandura. First he comes up with modeling, now he comes up with attribution theory. And there are a whole bunch of studies which show the same thing. Whenever people attribute their failures to things that are within their control, they improve. When they attribute their successes to things within their control, they improve. Because they know it's in their hands. They know it's in their hands. And they feel that responsibility and that ability to cause their own life. We have been taught to be victims. We've been taught in the government schools. Think about what happens in schools. Let me tell you, has anybody ever gone with their kids to class? That is a terrible thing when I see children in class. Here's a child who has a holy love of learning. You can't keep a kid from learning. Kids are always asking you questions that you'd rather they didn't ask you. You tell me you hate Mrs. Smith, but you ask her over. Why? Because I'm a hypocrite. Thank you. You're fat. Why do you keep eating? Oh, kids ask all those questions, right? Why do you smoke if it always makes you cough in the morning, Mom? Shut up, she explained. We've been taught to be victims. If you go into the schools, here's what happens. This child that's as curious as a dog in a new territory, sniffing around, finding out what's new, is taught to sit in a ticky-tacky little desk and not to move. Be a robot. Sit erect. Be quiet. Children should be seen and not heard. Wrong. They should be obscene and not hurt. And the child is taught to ignore his natural desire to know. He is taught to snuffle it out, to suffocate it, to shut up, to be like everybody else, goddammit. You're not special. Like hell they're not. They're all special. And they're taught to sit in that desk for hours and hours. And if you have to engage in a bodily function like go to the bathroom, you need permission? Permission? What's next? Permission to breathe? You want to ask a question, you need permission. You didn't raise your hand, Tommy. You can't ask that question. And they teach them to passively wait there while the teacher teaches them what the teacher wants them to know. Do you think the teacher always has your child's best interests at heart? Do you think your teacher knows your child's needs and desires as well as your child does? No. There have been tons of studies that show that if you leave infants in a room with food, all kinds of food, cookies, cakes, candy, fresh fruit, kids naturally gravitate toward healthy food. What a big surprise.
You want to train kids?
Learned behavior. Modeling. They take after you. It's your fault, you son of a bitch. You remember that. Your kids are wrong. It's your fault. Now, kids are taught to sit there and passively wait for knowledge to be dumped into their brain. Is that true or not true? They're taught to learn what they're told to learn. Isn't that true? What have they done? You put them in a position where they are victims of the educational system, where they are passively waiting to be taught, where learning is not an activity, but a passive fill me with what you want me to know. And every year they sit in those desks, every year they're being taught to be a little more passive. But it's not just the schools. It's not just schools. TV. How about this? Pop the TV on. What are you saying to the TV? Entertain me. Interest me. Make my life worthwhile. People spend 7 hours a day in front of that TV, waiting to be informed. Do you think the TV's interests are the same as yours? Your child is taught to passively accept what is given to him, passively allow himself to be shaped by his environment, and that teaches helplessness. I am a danger to my environment. I'm a clear and present danger because I always reshape it. I drive my spouse crazy, which is an important activity everyone should learn to do. I view craziness as an opportunity for her to grow and evolve as a human being. She views it as a pain in the ass. Obviously, she's mistaken, because I couldn't be wrong on a subject as important as this. Now, we are taught to accept what the schools give us, what the system gives us, what the post office gives us. We are taught to be passive. Now, the issue is one of dependency versus self-reliance, independence versus dependence, an inner locus of control within ourselves or an outer within other people. We're either self-directed or other-directed. Hey, if you don't run your life, someone else will. And it's frightening to think people say that's fine with me because they're taught to do that. I told the story of the bird feeder, but I like it. I like it because it's true. Go down to a store. If you really want to educate yourself, do this. Go get yourself one of those little bird feeders that they fill with bird seed. And I remember the first time I saw my mother's, and I told this story the other night, and I'm going to repeat it because I like it. And in the bird feeder, you dump all the bird seed there. You hang it right outside the window to tease the shit out of the cats. Those cats need something to wake them up. Bam, hit that wall. Really wakes them up. It also keeps the birds on their toes. They don't get too complacent. And in the note for the bird feeder, it said, after the bird feeder is emptied, be sure and leave it empty for a few days. Otherwise, the birds will come to depend upon you and not learn to forage for themselves. The bird feeders care more about the bird's self-reliance than the system cares about yours. That is a metaphor to life, and it's a truth. Now, how does this apply to self-reliance? As they say in politics, that's a very good question. I'm glad you asked. We very often play victim to the state, and it's equally true in the Freedom Party. Sometimes we pretend we're victims instead of taking control. To the extent that you're active, you are taking control. To the extent you're active, you're taking control. If you want to take the attitude that it's the government's fault if things don't work out for you, it's the government's fault if you're not earning enough, it's the government's fault if everything's screwed up, it's the government's fault if your life doesn't work, it's the government's fault if nothing is going right, it's the government's fault if your life stinks, guess what? Your life will stink. Now, I got to tell you something about dependence that everybody knows and nobody knows. As you become more passive and as you play the victim, you become more dependent on the people that do take responsibility. Does that make sense or not make sense? Okay. Once the government has you dependent on them, once the school system has your children dependent upon them for education, they own you. They own you. They own your mind and they own your life to the extent you let them run it. Your life is a bus. Who's sitting at the wheel? You or somebody else? Your life is a bus. Who is sitting at the wheel? You or your mother, goddamn her, or the school system, goddamn it, or somebody else, the creeps. It's your wheel and it's your bus, and if you're not running it, it's your responsibility to take it back. Now, responsibility is something that is self-enriching. As you try it, it gets to be more fun. It's sort of like sex. Sex the first time, you can't believe it really occurred to you. And afterwards, you begin to get creative. Some people develop a whole lifestyle centered around it and even do ads. But that's a way of taking control of their life, too. Now, I said once the government is in control of your life, they own you. Let me tell you a question, and this is a self-responsibility question that I ask people who advocate government welfare. I want you to listen very carefully to it because it is a brilliant question, even if it is mine. I had a friend that told me that we've got to have government welfare, otherwise the poor will starve, the aged will be in the streets, the helpless will die, and no one will give them a hand. And I looked at this person and I came up with a question that amazed even me. That's hard to do because I'm not easily impressed. I'm teasing. It's all right to tease. I looked at this lady and I said to her, how will this welfare program enable the people on welfare to become self-supporting? Did you hear that question? How will this welfare program enable the poor to become self-supporting? And then you do the hardest part, because you're smart. This is the hard part. You shut up until they answer it. How will this welfare program enable the poor to become self-supporting? And do you know what the woman did? She worked for the welfare system, I want you to know, in the U.S. She looked at me and I could see her thinking, and I was not going to interrupt because I think that's a holy activity. And her face dropped and she said, God, it's not. They're going to always be dependent, aren't they? She quit the welfare system. She quit her job. She went to work for another branch of the government, but she quit the welfare part.
It's a start.
That's a start, isn't it? There's a movement in the right direction. Now, I got to tell you some things about responsibility. Responsibility divided is a responsibility denied. German concentration camps of the Jews. Anybody remember watching, I don't know if you saw them or whether you read about them, the trials in Jerusalem of Eichmann and the thugs? Every one of them had the same story. It came back to the same goddamn story, and it really made me angry. I did not kill the Jews. I merely put the Jews on the train. I did not kill the Jews. I merely drove the train. I did not kill the Jews. I merely unloaded the train. I did not kill the Jews. I merely marched them into the concentration camp. I did not kill the Jews. I merely gave them subsistence-level food and a little less to watch them fight for it. I did not kill the Jews. I merely marched them to the gas chamber. I did not kill the Jews. I merely brought the poison to the camp. I did not kill the Jews, and the story went on and on and on. You got to remember, if everybody's responsible, nobody is responsible. Responsibility divided is responsibility denied. Anybody ever have your luggage sent to a different city than you were sent to on an airline? What happens if you bitch about it? Doesn't the agent say, I'm not responsible? And doesn't the baggage handler tell you, I'm not responsible? And doesn't the person running the department tell you, I'm not responsible? And doesn't the ticketing agent tell you, I'm not responsible? Until you find out that everybody was responsible, so nobody's responsible. Responsibility divided is responsibility denied. Now that's equally true with us. I want you, when you analyze government, I want you to take a look at their so-called free services. Schools, don't concern yourself with your child's education. We'll take responsibility for it. Thank you! What a nice group of people. That's like saying, don't worry about your vacation plans, Mr. Steiner, here in Nazi Germany. We'll take care of your travel arrangements. Healthcare. Don't concern yourself with your health. We'll take care through OHIP. Don't worry about your health. You want to smoke and drink? You want to live a desolate life? No problem. We'll take care of you. And then, of course, when you screw up, they blame you. And they scapegoat you. Welfare. Don't worry about your family's well-being. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about the poor. It wasn't too many years ago, 50, 60 years ago, when if you had a poor person in the neighborhood, people would take up a collection and give them a hand. Is it true or not true? It is true. I've done it. I don't care about the welfare system one way or the other. If somebody needs something, I'm going to give them a hand. And I don't do it as a duty. I do it as a statement of my humanity and theirs. We're all people. But the welfare system says, don't you worry about the poor. Don't think about the poor. Don't show compassion to them. It's our job. We'll take care of them. And what does that do? That makes you callous toward the poor. It makes you forget about that you got people in your own neighborhood maybe could use a hand. It takes responsibility out of your hand. Retirement. Don't worry about your future. We'll take care of it. We'll take responsibility. I want you to remember this when you collect your first pension check from the government and say, wow, this is what I've been looking forward to. Now I feel really secure. And if you do, I have some really incredible swampland in Florida that I'd like to sell you to. But you won't have enough in your check to pay for both that and the cat food that you're going to be eating. I always like that. Do you realize that if there's enough poverty, that we're going to have a shortage of cat foods? There are going to be a lot of endangered squirrels out here in London, I got to tell you. Now, you know the big three lies. I'll respect you in the morning. What's the second one? Your check is in the mail. The third is we're from the government. We're here to help.
I know. That's one I heard.
I know you. Mark heard the version. I'll only put it in a little way, I'm sure. Look That's true in his case for anatomical reasons. That's all the way he can put it in. Okay. Now, anyway. Oh, lighten up. Everybody knows about Mark's sex life. It's a public book. It's a boring book. It's a soap opera, but it's his. You've got to remember that the government doesn't take freedom. They assume responsibility. Now I'm going to take it at persuasion. I'm going to take it at persuasion. Because we all have a personal responsibility. When you want something to happen, you are responsible to make it happen. When you want results produced, you are responsible for producing them. You are the cause of your own life. Whether you like it or not, I'm not giving you responsibility. I'm simply pointing out you are responsible for your life. You cause your own behavior. You make your own choices, even if it's the choice to be passive and play a victim. You can't not be responsible. You can only lie to yourself about being responsible. And do you know who lies to themselves about being responsible? Usually people that are screwing up their lives. And the more you take that position, the less your life works and the more screwed up it becomes. I want to apply that to persuasion for a minute. Now I'm going to give you a rule that I think you'll find powerful. And the rule is this. When you take 100% responsibility for communicating with the other person, when you take 100% responsibility for persuading them and getting your point across, you will begin to succeed. But let me tell you things that you do, and you'll walk out the door and you'll do them tomorrow, and it's okay, but I want you to remember that it's a mistake. It's okay to make mistakes. We're all entitled. Nobody asks you to be perfect. There was only one guy who even claimed to be perfect, and look what they did to him. 3 nails goodbye. Perfection is a difficult task. You're going to say, well, I tried to convince him about freedom, but he was stubborn. You just gave up part of the responsibility for communicating. I wanted to communicate a really great idea about the free market, but he was too stupid to understand. You just gave up responsibility. I wanted to share my idea with him, but he wouldn't give me the time. You just gave up some more. I tried to communicate to the TV audience, but they were too dense. You just gave up responsibility. I wanted to share my ideas with them, but blame, blame, blame. Tell you something, every time you blame someone else, you're denying your own responsibility. Every time you point the finger, I want you to remember, every time you point the finger, there are 3 pointing back. That's the way God designed it that way, was to remind you. It's a 3-for-1 plan. Responsibility, every time you blame or you posit or you attribute the responsibility for the communication outcome to anybody but yourself, you are giving up power over your communication. You are giving up the ability to produce the results you want. I want you to be aware of this. You are responsible for other people understanding your ideas. Is that clear? I am responsible for you understanding my ideas. And if it's not clear, we're going to stay till it is. You see, I take my responsibility for communicating very seriously. Those of you who had conversations with me last night, did I give you my full attention when we were talking? Did I make sure you understood? I have a personal rule in dealing with my friends, is that I discharge that responsibility. I communicate with them fully, no matter how late I have to keep them at my home to discharge this responsibility. Some of them understand early, just so they can get to bed. Some of them are willing to really grasp it so they don't have to tolerate another 3 hours. And I think that's damn nice of them, because they know I'm going to take it seriously. I want to talk to you about this. Oh my God, I'll agree with you in advance, just don't tell me. When you start taking responsibility for communicating, you start communicating. When you take responsibility for being understood, people understand you. Because now you know what happens when someone doesn't understand you? You change what you're doing. You don't blame them. Now what happens when they don't agree with you? You take responsibility. You don't blame them. Now what happens if they're confused? You take responsibility for unconfusing them and clarifying it. You don't blame them. And the more you do that, you know what happens? Things get easier. Taking responsibility is not some burden. It's like touching God. It is an opportunity that is absolutely phenomenal. Do you remember receiving your first paycheck? Do you remember getting it and looking at that check? I remember I felt so proud. I remember, this is my money. I earned it. It wasn't a duty. It was really a great rush. Personal responsibility is that same kind of rush. And that's true of your communication. Now, I talk about it in politics, but I take it real seriously. I am responsible for making my life work, and you're responsible for yours. And that's good, because you'll do a better job of running your life than I will. You know it better than I do, and I respect that. The more willing you are to be responsible, being responsible means causing the results you want to cause. Did you hear that? Being responsible means causing the results you want to cause. And if you're not getting the results you want to get, what do?
Change what you're doing.
Change what you're doing. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. Do you like what you're getting? Then change what you're doing. If you don't like the results you're getting, do something else. Don't do the same thing longer or harder or heavier or more frequently. Do something else. Because taking responsibility means causing things to happen. And the more you cause things to happen in your life, the more control you have over your life. And I got a question. I do this with everybody. Would you rather have more control over your life or less? How many want more? How many want less? Would you rather be able to produce the results you want to a greater degree or a lesser degree? How many would like a greater degree? Would you rather be able to make your happiness be in your hands more or less?
More.
Another ascetic for Jesus. If you want more control over your life, more power about the way your life works, take responsibility. That doesn't mean take blame. I'm not talking about feeling bad. I'm not talking about duties, unchosen obligations. I'm talking about recognize the fact you cause your life to work, or you cause it not to work. Your life is a bus. Who's at the wheel? Your life's a bus. Who's looking at the road map? Most people run their lives the way drunken bus drivers who were convicted 11 times for hit and run drive through crowds. That's the way many lives function. Let me share that with you. If you want your life to work, if you want to communicate with people, if you want people to understand your ideas, if you want people to join the Freedom Party, it's real simple. You take responsibility for making sure that they understand what you believe and understand how important it is. And you know what happens? They'll start understanding. It's like falling off a log, which is not that hard to do. Does this make sense? Does this make sense? Is it obvious? Write it down. Write it down. Write it down. Mark, you had a question.
Yeah, no, actually, it's just something I think I learned from you too. And it's an interesting thing to concern yourself with both in personal relationships and public speaking and one-on-one. And I think you said this, but I've said to the doctor, there are no such things as bad listeners. I've been accused of being a bad listener. But really, when you get down to it, there are only poor speakers. Because really the obligation is always on the speaker to communicate their ideas effectively. If a person's not listening, then it has to be attributed to the person speaking. There must be a reason they're not listening. You know, either you're not approaching them, or you're not communicating at their level, or all sorts of things. But, you know, it's easy for people to say, you're a bad listener, and that's why, you know, you don't understand what I'm talking about. But
Exactly.
I think the obligation always falls entirely on the speaker. After all, you're the one who wants to communicate. You're the one seeking a result.
Exactly. And I also turn that around. When I'm a listener, I take 100% responsibility for the speaker. Look, think about it. You've got it in every encounter you have with someone else. Either you take responsibility for the encounter or you leave it up to them. Who would you rather control the encounter? You or the other person? Do you want to let the other person control them? I don't. I'm willing to do that as a listener too, but by and large, Mark is very, very, very correct. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take it. First of all, does anybody have a question on this responsibility issue? Because this is vital on a personal level and politically. Does anybody have a question on that? It's so obvious, and we all know it, but we don't know it. I've got a question. I'm going to give you my scale of 1 to 10. If 10 means you take total responsibility for your life, you don't blame anybody, no con, no lie, you know you cause your own life, and you take full responsibility in all areas. That's a 10. And 1 is you never, ever, ever take responsibility. You wouldn't be caught dead being responsible for anything. I want you to write on your own piece of paper where you rate yourself right now. Don't do it for your neighbor. Don't do it to impress anybody. Do it honestly. I want you to write it. Write it down. 10, you take total responsibility in all situations. You always control the outcome. 1, you never, ever, ever. And again, I don't want to see your paper. I'm not going to quiz anybody on that, but you need to know it for yourself because you can increase your level of responsibility. And there's a book I want to recommend that I ran into, earlier this year. A friend of mine recommended it to me that talks about the issue. It's a book called Life Spring. Mark it down. It's Lifespring. You won't like the whole book. I didn't. Or at least I don't think you'll like the whole book. Take responsibility. If you want to like it all, it's okay. And it's written by a guy named John Hanley, Hanley. And he deals with issues like responsibility, and I like a lot of what he says, and I think you'll find it useful and interesting. I did. I try and take responsibility in all areas, and I had this guy connect with stuff I hadn't thought about, and I said, you know, that's a good point. So you may find it useful and interesting. Now, what time is it?
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock. Let's take a 10-minute break, and we're going to come back and we're going to do political cross-dressing. And that'll be a lot of fun.
I didn't bring another outfit.